Over on Jaguar Gator 8, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about a rivalry between Missouri and UCLA, and why the two schools hated each other even though they never played against each other. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want to give you a hypothetical scenario. Suppose you've got an offense that is already struggling to get a whole lot of anything going, and can't seem to find the end zone on a consistent basis no matter what they do. And now, to make matters worse, you're going up against one of the best defenses in the NFL next week, and a team that has shut down opponents on a week-to-week basis. And to make matters even worse than that, as it turns out, your starting quarterback got injured the week before, meaning that you've got to go up against this insanely good defense with a backup quarterback that you don't trust a whole lot. It's a tall order, and you need to do something creative and innovative in order to pull this one off. You're going to have to find a way to cater to the strengths of your backup, and maybe do some things that you haven't done on film before in order to surprise the opposition. But what if you didn't do that? What if you just decided, screw that, we're now a triple option team this week? You spend the entire week teaching your team a brand new offensive system that they're obviously not comfortable with, that they obviously can't learn in such a short amount of time, and even the players themselves are super mixed on doing this. Something like this seems really, really stupid, right? There's such a thing as being creative and innovative, and then there's such a thing as being too innovative to the point of being stupid, where you change up literally everything to the point where even though your goal is to surprise the opposition, you wind up surprising your own players even more. Well, as ridiculously stupid as that sounds, that's exactly what happened involving this man right here that you've been watching this whole time. Baltimore Ravens head coach Ted Marchibroda. Because in 1996, he had a bold strategy to beating the Denver Broncos. Let's play a defense that we have never played before. Let's completely change our identity in less than a week and see how it goes against one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. What could possibly go wrong? Literally everything. Everything could go wrong, because the results were predictable to anyone with a brain. Ted Marchibroda was a great head coach, but it's safe to say that this was not one of his finest moments. Not by a long shot. Because this is the story behind what might just be, in the over quarter-century long history of the Baltimore Ravens franchise, the dumbest coaching and the dumbest game plan ever. Before I talk about the actual game plan itself, and just how terrible it was on so many levels, we need some context to understand how the Ravens were doing entering this game. Because it's not as though they were messing up a winning formula. It's October 20th, 1996. It's week 8 of the NFL season, and as we're nearing the halfway point of the year, we have a big conference battle on our hands over at Mile High Stadium between the Denver Broncos and the Baltimore Ravens. This game is going to be a big test for the Ravens, since the Broncos currently sit atop the AFC West, and atop the entire AFC for that matter, with a 5-1 record. They've got the best point differential in the conference at plus 51, an offense that was near the top of the conference by averaging 24 points per game, and an offense that was coming off of back-to-back great outings, where they had 402 yards against the Bengals and 406 yards against the Chargers. The bad news for the Ravens was that this game felt like a must-win on so many levels. They were just 2-4 entering this one against Denver, and if they dropped to 2-5, then you could just end their season right then and there, as they would be 3 back of a whole host of teams for the final wildcard spot. But the even worse news? On paper, as you're going to be able to tell from all these defensive lowlights of theirs, the Ravens did not have the defense to match up against the Broncos and stop their firepower. Remember, this was a Denver team that had Terrell Davis, who already had 623 yards through the first 6 games of the season, and was averaging over 4.8 yards per carry and over 100 yards per game. The future Hall of Famer was well on his way to making the Pro Bowl that year, and being one of the best running backs in football. This was a Denver team that had John Elway at quarterback, and a very good Elway at that, as he had thrown 6 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and was coming off of an incredible performance at home against the Chargers, where he completed over 78% of his passes with 323 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a passer rating of 121.8. This was a Denver team that had Shannon Sharpe at tight end, as the best tight end of the 90s was having maybe his best start to a season ever, as through 6 games, he already had 39 receptions for 469 yards and 5 touchdowns. The Ravens couldn't compete with that. Their defense was putrid. That's the whole reason they were 2-4 and in this hole in the first place. Through their first 6 games, the Ravens allowed 156 points, allowing 26 points per game, which was less than 1 point per game off of the New York Jets and Seattle Seahawks for the worst average in the entire AFC. In one of their games, they lost 46-38 to the New England Patriots, allowing Drew Bledsoe to throw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions, playing the game of his life. As a side note, if you want to learn more about that game, click the card in the upper right corner. This was a Ravens team that was entering this game against the Broncos looking like they couldn't stop a nosebleed, let alone a high-powered explosive offense. Let's just say there was a reason that the Broncos were favored by 11 points in Vegas. And if that wasn't bad enough, during their most recent game against the Indianapolis Colts, which they lost 26-21, they lost 2 of their defensive linemen for the season with injuries, losing Rob Burnett with a knee injury and losing Dan Footman with a forearm injury. That's a pretty big blow to lose not 1, but 2 of your starters on the defensive line for the season in the same game. Now, in fairness to the Ravens, and this is what's going to make what's about to happen really bizarre, the defense actually looked good in the second half of that game against the Colts. In the fourth quarter, the Colts had 4 drives, and the defense allowed just 1 first down and no points. In total, the Colts netted 18 yards in the fourth quarter, averaging a mere 4.5 yards per drive. In other words, without Footman and Burnett, the Ravens were absolutely holding their own defensively, at least in that quarter. So what would most teams do in this situation? In all likelihood, they'd promote the backups to the starters, as in, trot out the same lineup and defense that worked at the end of the last game, and they'd sign some free agents off the street, or maybe try and pull off a trade depending on who's on the block and depending on who's available. This is especially true when you only have a week to prepare for the game, and one of those days is a traveling day across the country to Denver. It's what just about every team does. When a receiver gets hurt, you sign another receiver. When an offensive lineman gets hurt, you sign another offensive lineman. Instead, the Ravens, in an absolutely puzzling move, decided to add literally no one. No one signed off the street, no trade pulled off, nada. Nothing doing. Despite the fact that they lost 2 defensive linemen for the season, they opted not to replace any of them, even just for depth purposes in case another guy went down or needed a breather. Because instead, the Ravens had a radical idea going into this game against the Broncos. They said, screw it, we're a 3-4 team now. Whereas the Ravens ran the 4-3 all season before this, now they were going to run the 3-4. Instead of having 4 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers, the Ravens would now line up with 3 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers. In case you don't realize how absolutely insane that is to switch from a 4-3 to a 3-4 and switch your entire base defense in less than a few days, especially before going up against one of the best offenses in football, it is nuts. It is borderline coaching malpractice. This is not a simple tweak. This is not adding a new play to the playbook. This is throwing out the entire playbook and replacing it with a new one. You taught your guys how to run the 4-3 defense all season, and now you're telling them to forget everything that they knew and play a scheme that they might not even fit in. There are some defenders who thrive in a 4-3 and absolutely stink in a 3-4, and vice versa. You can't just make that change in a matter of a few days. This is like if you went to Syracuse to play basketball under Jim Boeheim because you thrive playing the 2-3 zone. And then, in the middle of the season, he just decides that he's never going to play that defense again, and he's going to switch to a man defense. It's a completely different skill set. And this is especially true when even the players themselves are confused as to why you're doing this, and aren't buying into the change. It would be one thing if the players requested this, or the players were comfortable going from the 4-3 to the 3-4. But that didn't seem to be the case. Defensive end Anthony Pleasant, who had been in the NFL since 1990, and was coming off of a 1995 season with the Browns, where he had 8 sacks and led the league with 6 forced fumbles, so he knew what he was doing, summed up the thoughts of the team best when he found out about this midseason switch. As Pleasant said, "I was somewhat surprised that would happen, because we stepped up in Indianapolis with the 4 guys that are on the field. I guess we all thought we'd build on that, but we didn't. We're so accustomed to rushing with the 4-man front. I'm not used to rushing on the inside. I'm used to rushing on the outside." Defensive tackle Tim Goad said on this, "We've just got to keep playing. We were told they weren't going to bring anybody in. There's nothing we can do about it. We've just got to suck it up and go." Again, great way to boost the confidence in your players and get them to buy in. Great way to show that you trust them to get the job done, that you're changing your entire defense at the last minute. Which raises the question, what was Marchibroda's reason for doing this? He said that he did it because he wanted to catch the Broncos by surprise. Seriously. The reason that he changed the defense, which he did not have to do at all based on how well they played at the end of the Colts game, and based on how avoidable the problem was by just signing a defensive lineman, was to catch the Broncos off guard and fool them. Did he get the idea for this strategy from attorney at law, Lionel Hutz?
Surprise witnesses, each more surprising than the last. I tell you, the judge won't know what hit him.
Genuinely, what is the point of this? Surprising the Broncos is one thing, but you're surprising your own team to the point where they don't even know what they're doing and where they're not even comfortable. And it would be one thing if you were switching from a 4-3 to a 3-4 for the entire season, and you implement this in the offseason, when there's time to make the change. But from all accounts, this was a one-game switch. We're going to spend the week leading up to this game against the best team in football, teaching the fundamentals and the basics, instead of actually game planning and going in depth. And then we're going to forget about all of that next week. That's always a good sign. And obviously, there's one final question that we have to address, which is, did this strategy work out at all? Amazingly enough, it did. Ted Marchibroda was an absolute genius. John Elway had one of the worst games of his career. Terrell Davis averaged less than 1 yard per carry. The defense recorded 10 sacks, and the Broncos offense got booed off of their home. I'm just kidding, they got the ever-loving crap beat out of them. What did you think was gonna happen? How did you honestly think this one was gonna go? You have eyes, you have a brain, you can figure this one out. This was ugly with a capital U on the part of the Ravens defense, as just about everyone expected. Who knew that switching literally your entire defense in less than a week against one of the best offenses in football, simply because you wanted to catch them by surprise, was going to leave your defense confused and out of position, and was going to make your own team play very terribly? Because even though the Ravens had a very good day offensively, scoring 34 points, it wasn't enough. Because the Broncos, exploiting a 3-4 defense that was quite literally put together yesterday, scored 45. John Elway had 326 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and a passer rating of 105.3. Terrell Davis had his best day as a pro, running 28 times for 191 yards and 2 touchdowns, all while averaging over 6.9 yards per carry. Shannon Sharpe, once again, was nothing short of dominant at the tight end position, recording 9 catches for 161 yards. Denver's offense netted a whopping 548 yards total, and Elway stood upright the entire game, as he didn't take 1 sack. For some perspective, the Ravens had 4 sacks the week before, and twice already on the season, the Broncos allowed 5 or more sacks in a game. In this game, nothing. Wonder if the fact that no one was rushing the quarterback from their usual spot and from their strength played any part in that giant goose egg in the sack column. Could just be a giant coincidence. Who am I to say? Everything about this is just seriously baffling on so many levels. The Ravens thought that their best chance to beat the Broncos was to change their defense the week of the game, sign no defensive linemen as reinforcements, and do this to catch the Broncos off by surprise. Which raises the obvious lesson from this story. Surprises are absolutely stupid and moronic if the person doing the surprising is more surprised than the person that you're trying to surprise. If your players are incredibly against changing up the way that they play the game because they don't feel comfortable, then maybe listen to them and don't leave them hanging out to dry against one of the best teams in the NFL and a future Hall of Fame quarterback. Ted Marchibroda made this change in the hopes that his Ravens defense would fly high. Instead, their makeshift defense was shot out of the sky. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.